What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Ernie, Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about a character that, man, I actually been kind of want to talk about for quite some time, but just never really got around to doing so. And we're actually going to do it now because this character is going to be busting their way onto Amazon Prime before too long for the animated series. We're going to be talking about the character from Image Comics, Invincible. That's right, we're going to talk about this character and everything you probably don't know about, and we're going to talk about it right now. But first, let's hit that intro.
Word to wise, grass only greener when it's fertilized. Gave them truth in these songs, they prefer to lies. Destiny beautiful, adrift in her purple eyes. You can't see me, you Stevie, wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie and make it look easy.
Invincible, real name Marcus Sebastian Grayson, first appeared in Savage Dragon number 102 in 2002. Despite Tech Jacket number 1 being often cited as his first showing, Tech Jacket number 1 came out 2 months after Savage Dragon number 102. He is also created by Robert Kirkman, Corey Walker, and Ryan Otley. Mark Grayson is the son of famed superhero Omni-Man, real name Nolan Grayson, who is from an alien race called the Viltrumites, beings with incredible abilities and powers. When Nolan and his human wife gave birth to Mark, he inherited Omni-Man's abilities thanks to his Viltrumite DNA being dominant and overriding Mark's own human DNA. So for all intents and purposes, Invincible, despite only being half Viltrumite, is practically pure-blood Viltrumite. Despite this, Mark wouldn't develop his abilities until late in his teens, and out of nowhere his powers developed, and Nolan would help train him in the usage of his abilities and how to be a true superhero. Invincible's name is not just for show. He's legit invincible to pretty much anything in the known universe, whether it's being shot, stabbed, hit by a car, falling from a rooftop, shot with a rocket launcher, being smashed by a train, you name it, he can survive it. He's even been hit by a nuclear blast and been on a planet while it exploded and suffered little to no damage whatsoever. Physically speaking, the only thing that can really damage him is being hit with the force of another Viltrumite, and even then, it would take a sustained beating to really wear him down. There are ways to get around Invincible's invulnerability though. He can be attacked internally, like in the pages of Invincible number 108, where we saw an evil alternate reality version of Invincible killed by having a bomb implanted in his body and it detonating inside of him. We have also seen cases where guns like that of the Space Racer can pierce through Viltrumite skin and kill them. There's also been notable instances of a plant by the name of Klaxus, which can poison Viltrumites and make them more vulnerable to external attacks. And of course, there's also the Ragnar, alien species that is naturally capable of killing and injuring Viltrumites. Another weakness that's often talked about throughout the series as you go through Invincible is the fact that sometimes Mark's anger can get the better of him, and oftentimes he becomes incredibly concerned that he's going to lose control of his powers and wind up hurting someone and worse, killing them. Mark is not only physically invulnerable, but also mentally as well. He is incredibly difficult to telepathically dominate. Even simple suggestion is difficult to pull off on him. With a name like Invincible, it's no surprise that even when he can be hurt, he can bounce back almost as if nothing ever hit him. He's had mortal wounds inflicted upon him and lived to tell the tale. Even things that would kill a normal human, Mark has been able to shrug off or sleep off in less time than a human could. Not only can he heal such grievous injuries, but he can endure through them, allowing him to continue fighting even through extreme physical trauma. He's been able to stay conscious and active even when he's broken most of the bones in his body, and more specifically, even fighting through a skull fracture. He's even had his guts ripped out of his body and continued fighting, though eventually he did pass out. Initially, Invincible possessed superhuman strength that allowed him to lift upwards of 400 tons, and eventually he was able to lift over 30,000 tons with help, and then even later on he was able to lift the same amount of weight without help at all. He has been shown to successfully lift and hold up warships, cruise ships, air and spacecrafts, and even whole buildings. Interesting sidebar about Invincible's abilities is that because of his viltrumite DNA, the more he pushes his abilities and essentially exercises his powers, the more powerful he becomes, because these abilities are like a muscle. The more you work them, the better they get. Speaking of muscles, as a result of his muscle mass, his speed has increased exponentially as well, allowing him to move at incredibly fast speeds that have yet to be measured accurately. He can also fly with incredible speed as well, being stated as fast enough to fly from Earth to Mars in a matter of a few days, which is about roughly 77.753 million miles. Since his early superhero days, this speed has increased, with him now being able to travel at 250 times the speed of light. He's been able to fly from Earth to Alpha Centauri in the span of a week on one breath of air. And for those that don't know what that means, that's roughly 4.367 light years away, or around roughly 25 trillion miles away. Speaking of traveling in space, Invincible cannot actually breathe in space. He simply holds his breath while in the vacuum of space. During the earliest parts of his superhero career, Invincible could maintain holding his breath for an entire day, but can now do so for an entire 7-day week. And thanks to his viltrumite DNA, he can survive in space without the need of a special suit. All he has to worry about is maintaining his breath. Now that I've said all that, it probably comes as no surprise to you that Invincible is long-lived, thanks to his viltrumite DNA. The older he gets, the slower he will age, and if that weren't enough, he's already fated to live for thousands of years. A lot of his abilities we've talked about are his physical ones, but let's not forget Mark is considered to be a genius-level intellect. He's able to completely and accurately memorize and comprehend complex ideas, plans, tactics, and skills, plus he's able to adapt on the fly to practically any situation, outcome, or environment with little to no effort. Interesting side note about Invincible's name, he didn't get his name from his power set, being invincible. His name is actually something that came from a warning from his principal at his school, where he was warned that he is not invincible. This inspired him to take up the name Invincible. Invincible has not only fought alongside Image Comics mainstay characters like Savage Dragon and Spawn, but he's also met Spider-Man and the Avengers. These were treated as something that happened in an alternate dimension from the one Invincible typically resides in, and despite that, he does quickly find out that he and Spider-Man have a lot in common. This is a story that takes place between the pages of Invincible number 33. Interesting postscript to that crossover is that eventually Invincible artist Ryan Ottley would go on to provide pencils for Nick Spencer's Spider-Man run, which is why every time I read Nick Spencer's Spider-Man, I'm always waiting for Spider-Man to punch through somebody's chest. Oh, and if that weren't enough, Invincible has also met Batman, who he basically said had a lazy superhero name. Speaking of other superheroes, Invincible is not like many other mainstream superheroes. He doesn't have a strict no-kill code or a try to save your villain's morality clause. Invincible has on multiple occasions straight up buried the villains he's faced. He's also accidentally gotten innocent people or others close to him killed due to a bad call. That said, Invincible, though he does have a moral code, believes that sometimes you just gotta do what you gotta do, and if that means killing the person trying to destroy the world to save the lives of billions, so be it. Evil and good are not always so black and white. In the comic Invincible, Mark believes that, there are tons of shades of gray. Speaking of choices, Invincible is unique among other contemporary superheroes in that he is a college dropout. something that is more common to see in superhero comics today, but at the time it was unusual, mostly because his decision was just as much a moral decision as it was a monetary one. He didn't want to endanger other students due to supervillains coming to destroy the campus every other week, and he felt that it was selfish to try and live a normal life when he is in fact not normal. He also felt he didn't need a college diploma since by this point he was working for the government and already making a metric crap ton of money just protecting the planet. Also, speaking of Invincible's school life, I would be remiss if I didn't inform you that he goes to Reginald VelJohnson High School, which for those of you who are old heads like me or grew up in the times of TGIF, you probably remember that name being the actor who portrayed Carl Winslow on the hit sitcom series Family Matters, as well as playing Sergeant Al Powell in the Die Hard series. And another interesting little side note is that even though the first parts of his name don't necessarily add up, but Invincible's principal's last name, oddly enough, is Winslow. Invincible co-creator Robert Kirkman originally planned for Invincible to go for a long time, well past its nearly 2-decade run, but for whatever reason, he said one day he just upped and realized that maybe he should go ahead and end it before it got out of hand. Something I think a lot of us wish that he would have done with the Walking Dead comic book series. For a character whose television series debut is right around the corner and has never appeared in a movie before, Invincible has actually popped up on television in some of American pop culture's most watched television series and movies, believe it or not. He's appeared in the Simon Pegg and Nick Frost film Paul, where he's depicted on a shirt Simon Pegg is wearing, and his comics and merch also appear in a comic book store during the movie's runtime. In season 6 of The Walking Dead's 8th episode, there's a scene where Sam's room is decorated with some mini-mates of not just Invincible, but Omni-Man, Alan the Alien, and Adam Eve. This is somewhat unsurprising since Robert Kirkman co-created the Walking Dead comic that the show is based on, and he also acted as an executive producer for the show. And last but not least, the Behind Closed Doors episode of The King of the Hill shows Bobby Hill reading the comic Invincible, which has cover art that bears a striking resemblance to Invincible #1. An actual action figure of Invincible appears in another episode of King of the Hill titled Earthly Girls Are Easy, where character Buck Strickland is seen playing with one. And while there were plans to release a live-action movie back around 2009 and 2010, this never ultimately happened. However, comedian and actor Seth Rogen, along with Evan Goldberg, have produced the Invincible animated series, adapting Robert Kirkman, Cory Walker, and Ryan Ottley's story for Amazon Prime, where Invincible will be voiced by The Walking Dead's Steven Yeun. Now, normally when I do these videos, I like to pick an actor who I think could play this character on the big or small screen, and the actor that actually came to mind, I actually had a tough time with this one. You would be surprised, but most of the people I kept thinking about to play this character were already people who were too old to be playing someone who just discovered their superpowers in high school. But the one person that actually leapt out at me was Ryan Potter. Now, you're probably sitting here saying to yourself, who the hell is Ryan Potter? But if you are familiar, you probably recognize his voice where he plays Hero in Big Hero 6. He also does voice work for Jurassic World Camp Cretaceous, and many of you may have actually seen him in the former DC Universe, now HBO Max series, Titans, where he plays Beast Boy. Ryan Potter is a very good actor. I like just about everything I've ever seen him in, and I feel like he actually would be able to play the type of character that Mark Grayson is. I feel like he could have that same level of charisma and can really make it work, and especially grow into kind of like the same way we see Tom Holland as Spider-Man, how we're like, oh man, I could really see this guy grow into becoming the adult Peter Parker that we all know in the comics now. I feel the same way about Ryan Potter. I think Ryan Potter could, if actually given the chance, you could watch him grow from being that Invincible that we see in the comics in the early days to that Invincible who we see far later by the time you get to the end of the comics run. Now, normally when I do these, I also like to give some recommended reading. And in this one, the recommended reading, I'm not gonna lie, it's gonna be all over the place. Of course, I'm gonna recommend that you check out Invincible number 1 and 2, because I think those give you a really good idea of what the character is gonna be about throughout the entire series going forward. I also think that you should check out Invincible number 16, where we get to witness the birth of one of his more popular nemeses. And I won't say much more past that because a lot of these are gonna be spoilers. And of course, I also think you should check out Invincible number 26, where we're introduced to Invincible's brother from another mother, Oliver. One part of Invincible that I can't recommend enough is the Conquest story arc in the pages of Invincible number 61 through 65, where you get to see Mark go up against probably one of the toughest battles that Invincible has ever faced, and also the death of a longtime Invincible ally. I also think you should check out Invincible number 71 through 78 to see the Viltrumite War. And of course, as some of you may have heard myself and my co-host Carter on the Blerd Cave talk about, the Thrag versus Battle Beast fight that lasted multiple issues. And if you want to check that out, go check out Invincible number 115 through number 120. And last but most certainly not least, you definitely need to check out Invincible numbers 10, 11, and 12. Because there's a huge reveal about Mark's dad, Omni-Man, and I'm not gonna go into it here, and I honestly think that's one of those you should go into cold. I don't want to say anything more about it, but just know that that issue is a real huge turning point for a lot of people who follow the series, and I would even go as far as to say that until you got to about roughly that point in the comic series, no one really knew exactly where Invincible was going, and then suddenly this issue dropped, and out of nowhere, people immediately were like, oh my god, this series is going somewhere. Oh my god, I want to follow this for the next 100 some odd issues. It kind of reminds me in that regard to one of my favorite Kamen Rider series, Kamen Rider Build, where roughly around the same episode number, you get the huge reveal about one of the characters who's with the main protagonist, and it changes the way you view the entire rest of the series. And those of you who watch Kamen Rider Build, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about here. But anyways, I think Invincible is an amazing character. I can't wait to see this animated series that they're going to be doing on Amazon Prime, especially knowing what they're trying to do and how they got Ryan Ottley to come in and do the character designs for the animated series. It just, everything, it looks like the comic brought to life, and I'm so here and ready for it. And I would love to see more Invincible. Like, I'm actually kind of surprised that Robert Kirkman hasn't tried to revisit this series since it ended, and maybe it's for the best. Since it ended, let it stay ended, but it is one of those things that I think a lot of people are going to be clamoring for more Invincible very soon. But anyways, let me know what you thought about the Image Comics character Invincible. Have you always known about him, or are you today years old finding out about him? Keep it plus ultra and sound off in the comments.